When it comes to quarterback recruiting, we have been left in the dark by Boston College football as they've made everything secret. Now, on Tuesday, they got their quarterback, and boy, is it a big one.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College. I'm your host, AJ Black. I'm the editor and publisher of Eagle Insider and the host of this great podcast. I hope you all are having a great Wednesday. We're here to talk about football quarterback recruiting. As BC lands their quarterback, we'll talk about who that is, why it's a big deal. I'm also going to look at the pedigree of this quarterback. Compare it against other BC quarterbacks of the past. Where does this kind of fall in the hierarchy of quarterbacks since, the Jeff Jagosinski days? We'll get into all that in our second segment. And yes, I'm going to end this with talk about a swim coach. I'll tell you why. Yeah, it was disappointing that was the news that Blake James brought up. But it brings up a bigger picture of where BC sports is at. And I think it's a big conversation that's worth having. So packed episode today here on Locked On BC. Let's kick it off by talking about the news of the day, which is that, as I alluded to yesterday, Shaker Reisig, a quarterback from Union, Oklahoma, has committed to Boston College, flipping his commitment from the University of Utah to the Eagles. He had been committed to the Utes since January. And now he's an Eagle. And, he's only pledged. So, until January, you got to buckle up and hold on. But this is a big deal. Reisig is a smaller quarterback. He's not built like Emmett Moorhead was. Emmett Moorhead was 6'6". He was a big dude. Reisig is confirmed at 6 feet, 6'1". He's a smaller quarterback. But he comes from Oklahoma, where he's thrown over the last 2 years for 5,200 yards to go along with 52 touchdowns and 9 interceptions and a completion percentage of 75%. You watch his film, he's got good zip on the ball. He's got good arm strength. It's everything that you would want in terms of tools for Bill O'Brien to work with. Now, he is a little different than, what Jeff Hafley was going for, because you look at the quarterbacks that Hafley has brought in, Jonathan Montague, Jacoby Robinson, Peter Delaportis, Matt Reevy. Those are the 4 that he brought in. You look at all 4 of them, and they're all projects. I look at Reisig as not a project. This is a guy that he'll need a year or 2 to get his feet wet, but once you get him going, he has all the tools to be a ACC quarterback, to be a Power 5 quarterback. And that is exactly what Boston College needed. BC's up to 16, 17 commitments that we know of, over 20 with some of the ones that we don't know of yet. But everyone was asking, and fairly so, where the heck was the quarterback? The only name that you had heard of was Jay Beeman, who is a under-recruited quarterback out of Mississippi. But the staff had kept this under wraps. Now, why do they keep it under wraps? Well, when you're recruiting a guy that's committed to another school, you kind of want to keep it under the wraps. You don't want to make it a big deal because that other school could get pissed off. It makes things weird with the families of the recruits. You got to keep it quiet. So for guys like me who cover college football recruiting, they don't even want me to at this point, they didn't want me to know about that. Now, I've known about other committed players. They told me about that. But because the quarterback is a key position, because that is the bread and butter of a program, they couldn't afford to screw this up. They wanted him here. They got him on an official visit with his teammate, Ashton Cunningham, this past weekend. And in the process of all of this, you probably all saw the tweets. I mean, it wasn't, they were trying to keep it under wraps, but once he decommitted, once they got him, the coaching staff was pretty upfront about it, right? You saw lots of stuff out there about it. And if you could put breadcrumbs together, if you follow any of the names, you knew exactly who they were talking about. There were all sorts of little like tweets about it from some of the coaching staff that I mean, like it's not that hard. And then you have other people from other sites who are just basically saying it on their site. So it wasn't that big. It was the worst kept secret when he decommitted on Monday. Now, this is going to be a quarterback when you're looking ahead that I would imagine is going to quickly jump a lot of the guys on this roster. And we don't know what Castellanos is going to do next year. He has one more year of eligibility after this year. You know, could he stay? Could he go? It all depends on what happens this year and how he views BC, right? They also have Grayson James, who clearly has caught the eyes of the coaches staff. So he's going to be around for a couple of years as well. But I would imagine once those those quarterbacks kind of either graduate or transfer or whatever happens, it could be anything, right? That I think Reisig could be the next guy up. Um, I'm really curious to see what O'Brien thinks of Jonathan Montague because he's a fast quarterback. He runs a lot, and that doesn't seem like that's O'Brien's bread and butter. Jacoby Robinson, he is obviously still really young. I'm not sure what you have in him yet. He hasn't like when I've watched him at practices and spring games, like nothing has jumped out to me, but it's only his second year. So he could also be jumped and Matt Reeves gone. So that kind of leaves your quarterback room, right? I could see Reisig if he comes in and plays the way he looks in those films. If you watch his huddle film, you coach him up, you teach him the right technique and habits to, weed out all the bad stuff. He could be a special quarterback. There's a reason why he was a high 3-star quarterback. And in terms of BC's class, I think he's second or third on the class in terms of rating right now. But he had big offers: Oklahoma State, Missouri, Utah. There was more Illinois. There was a bunch of big programs that really wanted him, but it was the attraction. As he said to Tom Loy for my site, it was the ability to go and play for Bill O'Brien that caught his attention, and that tells you why getting a coach like this at the key position is a critical piece for BC. You brought in Jeff Halfley, who was good with defensive backs, and even then he kind of struggled. But you brought in a guy who has a pedigree at quarterback, the most critical position on the field, and it's going to open doors for guys that could be game-changing quarterbacks, program-changing quarterbacks. And I look at Shaker Reisig and say, this could be the guy. Now, my sources tell me this was the top guy on their big board from day one. I kind of was able to put 2 and 2 together early, but was sworn to secrecy because I didn't want to get the other school upset. But this is the guy that they wanted. They were able to identify and get him. Now, will they get a second quarterback? I haven't heard anything else about any other targets. But again, the quarterback's been quiet. Jay Beeman out of Mississippi was a under-recruited quarterback. I heard he's not making his official visit. He was originally going to be coming this weekend, but he's not coming. So kind of would cross that one off. But we'll have to wait and see. Now, in a moment, this is a big deal for BC, not just on the field, but on the recruiting trail as well, because this is the first time in a long time BC has landed a quarterback that has the interests that Shaker Reisig has. And I'll explain where it kind of lands and what other quarterbacks in BC's history have the background in the interest that he did. We'll get into all of that in just a moment. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that businesses are wearing so many hats. They might not have the time or resources to hire, so they take care of it for you. They do all the good work to make it easy for you to get those right candidates and get your job filled quickly. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This is Locked On Boston College, AJ Black. We're talking about Shaker Reisig, who has one of the greatest names I think BC has landed in a while. Like having a quarterback named Shaker um, is low key great. Like you've had Spiffy and you've had Steele, now you get Shaker. And as I said on Twitter, the Talladega Nights Shake and Bake Twitter GIF is going to be used a lot, I think. Now, Reisig, as I mentioned, was rated an 86, like a high 86 on 247 Sports. And it makes me think, like, you go back and you look at the quarterbacks that Boston College has brought in. Is this one of the biggest, like, the most recruited quarterbacks that they've landed? And you go back through the history, and I mentioned some of them in segment one, but I look at the ones that Jeff Hafley landed. Let's just start and talk about whether they had any interest anywhere close to where Reisig had. We'll go backwards. So we'll start with Jonathan Montague. Jonathan Montague was a quarterback that BC went after late in the cycle because they had a couple other quarterbacks that they've bombed on, and they went after him. And I know they liked him eventually, but he didn't have any offers. Like I think I don't I at least I mean he might have had one, but he was not highly recruited. He was a late commitment. He was kind of the end of the recruiting class, try to get a quarterback in your class and go for what you can get. No, so he's nowhere near where Reisig was. You go the year before that, you got Jacoby Robinson. Jacoby Robinson was also under the radar. He was not highly recruited by I don't think anybody. If I remember correctly, he came from Texas, Henderson, Texas, and he had an offer list of mostly historically black colleges like Alcorn State, Jackson State, Northwestern State, and Yale. That was it. So he had zero Power Five offers. He also had a rating that was higher. He has a rating that was higher than Reisig. I don't know where that comes from, but um, he was definitely not recruited anywhere near the level of Reisig was. You go back the year before that, Peter Della Portis, he had some offers, and they were roughly the same. His rating was a little bit higher, but yeah, I don't. If I remember correctly, Della Portis didn't even make it to official visit season. I think he committed early, so he was, maybe you could say he was at the same level as Reisig. I still think Reisig had more offers than Della Portis did. And for those folks that are wondering what's going on with Peter Della Portis, he's still on the roster. I don't think he'll ever play. I don't, he was like fourth or fifth on the depth chart. He entered the transfer portal after the 2022 season and then came right back to BC, but I don't see him ever playing. And the same thing with Matt Reevy. Matt Reevy was just like Montague was a end of the cycle quarterback. So two of the guys that BC landed under Jeff Hafley were late cycle guys that were not recruited at all after their senior season, caught some attention, and then they got offered and committed. You had two decent quarterbacks in Robinson and Della Portis. I would argue neither of them had Robinson definitely didn't have the interest, and Della Portis was kind of on the same fence. Now you go further back. So, I'm not going to go through every name. Darius Wade, he had a couple offers. I don't think he was as heavily recruited as you may think. Anthony Brown would be one. He had some good offers out there. So the two names that I go back to as the quarterbacks that are kind of in the same boat as Reisig are Anthony Brown and Chase Reddick. Those are the two quarterbacks. And I'm sure there's others that if you go further back that have that pedigree, but you have to go all the way back to find that. Jeff Hafley had none. Steve Adazio had one. And Bill O'Brien already has his first that has that kind of. Because when you go for a quarterback that has interest from other Power 5 programs, you know that there's names and faces of coaches that are watching him and going, we want him at our program. when you're bringing in a bunch of guys that are flyers or diamonds in the rough, you're taking a gamble. This is not a gamble. Reisig is a guy that could, as I said earlier, play quickly. And if you can start to build your quarterback depth chart with guys like this, guys that have shown interest, have done things, and really caught the eyes of Bill O'Brien, then you're in good shape. You're starting to get your program at where it needs to be, because it only takes one hit to get your quarterback out. And if your next guy up is just a project that can't read defenses, can't read blitzes, can't do that kind of stuff, your season's screwed. So I like this high. I like this commitment. I think it is one of the biggest quarterback commitments in the last 20 years for BC. That's where things are at. I'll go on a limb here and say this is one of the biggest ones. And I think that's credit to the staff, credit to Ray Brown out of Oklahoma, a defensive back who opened the doors to recruits in Oklahoma. As I said on yesterday's episode, who the heck knows the last player from BC that has committed from Oklahoma? And you have Reisig, and I have a crystal ball for his teammate, Ashton Cunningham, to come here too. So that's credit to him, and credit to Jonathan DiBiaso, Bill O'Brien, and Will Long for being able to close the deal on this one, because it's a good get for BC. Now, in our final segment, I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to get into swimming, as BC made a hire that should be exciting, but has a lot of mixed feelings. I'll explain what that all looks like in a moment. Summertime means baseball and more, and you can bet it all on FanDuel. You know what I love on FanDuel? Even if I'm not into the game itself, I love home run prop bets, because if you nail it, the payout for a lot of these players is really good. Like if you're going to do it on Ohtani or someone who has hit a ton of home runs, even like Rafael Devers, you're going to struggle. But if you're feeling like, oh, this guy has got this pitcher's number, you can get onto FanDuel, get those odds, and you win good. It's much better than straight odds for me. I love it. So if you get in now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can bet on anything from Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This is Locked On BC, AJ Black, and we're talking about the big tweet from Blake James on Monday. I had a whole segment of what I was hoping would be the announcement. So he said, big announcement for Eagles or something like that on Monday. And I said on yesterday's episode, there were two things that I was hoping it would be. Either it's renovations to Alumni Stadium, or it's some sort of facility upgrade, whether it's a new practice facility for hockey, a women's lacrosse facility. Honestly, that would be a big deal. Or something else, right? In terms of facilities. Those were the things I was looking for. And what we got was none of that. And it was a hire of 5-time Olympian Dara Torres as the new swim and diving coach. She's one of the most decorated Olympians in U.S. history. Has been to 5 Olympic Games, got 12 medals, 4 gold, 4 silver, and 4 bronze. And she's been part of that swim team forever. Now, this is her first coaching gig, but she's a big, big name. And so there's a mixed feeling, I think, a lot among fans out there about this hire. First of all, people are upset with Blake James for pumping this up so much for a program that, no offense to the swimming and diving team, most BC fans aren't really that invested in. And so they don't see the value in it. And whether you like it or not, that's kind of where it's at. It's public perception, right? For the team itself, it's a big deal, and I get that. I'm just saying, from the masses, the swim and diving team, even if they hire an Olympian, doesn't really move the needle for fans. They were thinking bigger, so I get that. But there's another argument that's going on I think is worth discussing. And that is this is a big hire. And some folks are thinking, like, why are you spending so much money on a program that just got um, nailed for hazing? They had their whole season canceled last year, or most of their, I think it was their whole season canceled for a bad hazing incident. Um, and those folks are saying, like, BC, their resources are limited. So, BC has what 31 varsity teams. We hear it all the time. Spreading it thin, makes everything kind of sink a little bit. That being said, I think every time I talk about the swim team, I talked about the hazing, and I got yelled at by some former swim team players. They're not on scholarship, or the financial aid is not what you think it might be, and the funding is very different than football. So it's not a one-to-one situation where, like, football is, like, completely funded by all the revenue that's brought in, the school, all that kind of stuff. Swim team has a different kind of philosophy with that. So the fact that they still exist means is not like it's going to impact football in any way, or basketball, or any of that stuff, right? So them being there um is okay. And what I want to say is BC has always made it a big deal that they've had this huge plate of sports. And for the first time, this is just another example of it. It feels like Blake James gets that. He didn't get the tweet. The tweet should have been that he didn't do a good job of public perception there, because you could have announced this and not had the fans disappointed, which is what he led it into. But what I would say is that every program I'm starting to watch and see improvements because of his interventions and his support in that program. Whether it's baseball, hiring Todd Interdonato, and starting to see, they got a transfer who was like a really highly rated transfer because they're putting the money into it. You see that there. There's the new basketball facility. They hired a assistant coach for basketball from Florida State. When would BC ever do that? They hired Bill O'Brien. You know, they extended Acacia Walker Weinstein to make her the highest paid coach in women's lacrosse. BC's starting to get it in terms of spending money. So whether you agree, and you feel free to disagree that, like, swimming teams should exist or whatever, that's your prerogative. But if they're gonna exist and you're spending the money anyways, bringing in a name that is so revered in swimming, like anyone in swimming is gonna know who, like, in that like the recruits, the players, the swimmers, excuse me, they're going to know who Dara Torres is, because she's a huge name. She was huge in the Olympics, even when I was watching, and I know who she is. So you put in the resources and you're going to make them successful. I think getting all of your programs back up, getting them to be competitive, because for how many years, even if you don't follow them, you go to bc.com and you see all those Olympic sports, all those sports that maybe you don't care about, and they're always last. They're down in the dumps about everything. Like, swimming was bad for a while. They've had some years where they've been really lean. You have those programs, and if you're gonna do it right. Bring in the right people. Bring in the right coaches, because it does help the athletic profile to have uh, you know when you're going for directors cups and things like that, that your teams are competitive. And for the swim team, this is a big deal. So whether you agree with how Blake James announced it, which I already said I don't, this is a big deal for Boston College. Now, hopefully, maybe we'll get some of the news that you were hoping for a little at a later time. But for now, we'll leave it at that. Now, we're going to probably not be back tomorrow for an episode. I apologize. With recruiting season, this is what I'm getting into. We'll be back. We'll be starting to have Mitch on in September, in July, excuse me, to talk about the upcoming season. But right now, we're like in the midst of recruiting. Things are kind of quiet right now, so I probably will take a day off because I could use it. But if there's more news, believe me, we'll be back here at Locked On BC. Do this every day. Now, if you're listening in your car, give us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Recommend us to your friends. There's a great Boston College community out there, and I love to get my voice out there to all of them. So make sure you recommend Locked On BC to your friends and family who like BC. And check me out on Twitter at AJBlack247 and check out my work on Eagle Insider. There's a lot up there. We have a full scouting report on Shaker Reisig, the new quarterback, and we'll have more news as it breaks. So thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all again tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Boston College, your team every day.